Hi there. My name is Jessica Burrows Falcon, and I wanted to, share a little bit about um, coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 as the wife and daughter of first responders. So I'll start out 20 years ago. I'm 30, and so at the time of 9/11, I was 10 years old. Just a kid. I went to school out in Jamestown, Rhode Island at the Lawn Avenue Middle School. I was excited because I was moved to the big school. I was in 5th grade, and my teacher was Miss Riley. And September 11th started out as a normal day, Mom kissed us goodbye, he went off to school. My father went off to work. My father was with the North Kingstown Police Department in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. And then the world changed. My mother at the time was staying at home, and she would always watch the Today Show. So apparently, she has video, actually. She recorded it. I don't remember when or what it was, but she decided, she just had that sense something was going on. So she actually has a videotape, or she did, of the Today Show from the part where they are first showing the first tower that got hit with the smoke pouring from it. And I can't imagine what it was like to be her at that time. As the wife of a police officer, and my father was also a volunteer firefighter, watching all the firefighters, all the police officers, everybody responding, and knowing as she watched those towers fall that so many weren't going to be coming home. And I guess, I don't know if there's maybe a but for the grace of God, go moment or what, but I can't imagine what she went through. I do know that when I talked to Dad about it years later, he said that she had a little notepad, and she would sit there and write down the details. Finally, it got to a point where he said to her, stop. You're not working for the AP, stop. My mom always has enjoyed writing and crafts and stuff, and I think to some extent it was her trying to process what was happening. I didn't know. They didn't tell us. There was one kid named Justin who snuck into the teacher's lounge or something, and he saw it on television. So he's at one point where we were kind of just this weird shared hallway. Because it was originally, I think, 2 different rooms, but then they partitioned it, so it was 4. It was weird, kind of something weird like that. And we were in the little makeshift hallway in the 5th grade area. And Justin's telling us, he's like, there's these planes that hit the World Trade Center. And we're looking at him laughing, going, that's ridiculous. That's stupid. Justin was kind of known at the time for being a very wild child, made up crazy stories, at least that's what we thought, obviously. And so, you're thinking, this is bull. You can't believe this is happening. At the end of the day, the school sent us home, and they said, no after school activities, everything's canceled. I don't know why, but I remember sitting there thinking, my little 5th grade self going, I bet they have a water issue of some sort. I don't know. I wasn't thinking, because I guess my brain just filled in something innocuous, because I couldn't comprehend that something else could be happening. I come home, and I could I even tell you what I was wearing? Maybe. I remember I had a backpack with Sabrina the Witch on it. I had I think it was a pink a jean jumper and a pink shirt under it, whatever. And I'm coming home, and I'm all hi, Mom. And she's sitting on the couch, just glued to the television, and she looks at me, she goes, and you could tell she'd been crying. She goes, well, did they tell you? Tell me what, Mom? What do you mean? She literally takes me, parks me in front of the television, and is like, this. And I see them showing the footage of the planes hitting. How do you even comprehend that as a kid? How do you even... I don't think she had the words to tell me what was going on. So here, let me show you. And I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. this is really happening. I mean, as a kid too, so I kind of didn't, I think, fully appreciate everything that was going on at the time and how much would change. But I remember being kind of scared, you know? I remember for many years later, you know, my mom would have to remind me, oh, you know, we're not likely to get attacked in Jamestown. It's a very small town. Or, you know, oh, well, your father's safe. He's smart. He knows what he's doing. You have to trust he's safe. I'm like, okay, Ma, sure. And it was tough. We had gone up to my Aunt Wendy's that day. At the time, of course, this is 2001, so technology wasn't what it was. We were supposed to have a fraternal order of police meeting coming up. My mother and father were in the FOP. I think my dad was president, actually, at the time of the lodge. And they were going to postpone the meeting because of 9/11. And I remember my mom making copies of this postcard saying something about, you know, remember our brothers and sisters, you know, meeting canceled out of respect for them, whatever. And I guess the copier broke or something. Some guy came over. I think he was repairing it. And I remember kind of talking to him just because I'm a kid and I, you know, talk to random people because that's who I was. And I said something to him. I said, why would they go after the towers? Why would they do that? And he goes, well, the towers are a symbol of financial authority. And I was a kid. This went over my head. I didn't understand it until years later. I'm like, why would they go after the Pentagon? Well, military. Okay. Didn't quite hear about, or really understand what happened with 93 in the field in Pennsylvania until years later. Or at least, like, not right at that time. I remember at one point sitting there and I was playing with something to keep me to keep me occupied while Mom was busy doing the thing. At one point, sitting in front of the television at my Aunt Wendy's. And we were in her big trophy room with all the animals and stuff around. And I remember hearing that all planes were grounded. Full ground stop. Because of course, nobody was going to take off after that point unless it was military or when it was approved. And I remember shouting at the television, because of the stupid terrorists, like, angry. Because it was just like, how could they? The next day at school, Miss Riley, she's now married, but at the time she's Miss Riley, held up the paper, and we were talking about it a little bit. And I remember seeing, I think it was the Boston Globe, and you could see the fireball coming from one of the towers. And I don't really remember much of that conversation. I think it was hard for us to grasp. And I do remember sitting in art class and one of the girls talking about how they think that the terrorists had picked 9/11 because to make fun of the U.S. Emergency number, which is 911. Who knows? It influenced a lot, obviously, growing up. I remember writing a persuasive essay in 6th grade about why we had to go to war in Iraq or something. And I remember being kind of known as a war hawk at the time. That didn't age well. And just, life changed so much. Before 9/11, I remember going to the airport a couple times with my mother. Once she was a secret shopper, we were trying out a restaurant. And the other one, my father was coming back from a hunting trip in Canada. And I remember running up to the windows at TF Green and watching my father come off that prop plane, being so excited. And then after 9/11, that was done. I never saw the other side of TF Green until many years later. I was, I think, junior in high school, maybe? No, sophomore, when I actually flew for the first time. So it's really weird. Those little things that you don't think about. It just changed a lot of the culture in some ways. You saw some of the Islamophobia and, being worried and just that fear. And I remember as a kid being mad because they sent home a flyer thing. And it's, talking about mental health and talking to your kids and basically saying that we should limit that you shouldn't have your kid watch the news all the time, which in hindsight is not a half bad idea. But of course, as a kid, I'm pissed because I'm a news nerd. So I'm like, don't do that. I was part of it too, as I remember hearing Daryl Worley, "Have You Forgotten?" And there's a line where it's like, they say it's too disturbing for you and me. It'll just breed anger. That's what the experts say. If it were up to me, I'd show it every day. I feel in some ways though, like doing that, people have become desensitized. So now I'm gonna go forward to one more thing. When I was in school, one of the other things I did, some of the police officers were reserve or military, and one of them was a military police officer, and he's with the town. He made it by the grace of God, and I remember writing a letter, and I'll look for it, but I do remember, I think in somewhere, I know I saved it because it's one of my more like treasure things. We sent a care package and I wrote a letter to him. His name is John. And I said something like I'm a true blue American and, basically trying to do what I could to be a cheerleader. Obviously at the time, still not fully comprehending what was going on maybe, but trying to be supportive. So, John's a cool guy. So, years later, he was my school resource officer. And one time I was running late because my grandmother had died the night before, my father's mom. And I had the meanest, most awful lit teacher. I still, to this day, like, if I could go and talk to her and tell her how much what she did hurt me, I would do it. Just about to go in the door, had one foot in the door. I'm lost because I just had a death in the family. My parents sent me to school thinking she's better to hang out with her friends. And this lady, her rule was 2 feet in the door before the bell rings or you're late. I had 1 foot in the door. And she came and she's like, no, you have to go and, sign in this late. And I finally said, listen, I said, my grandmother died. I said, and because I'm crying. I'm like, I just want to go and sit. Please, let me in. And she wouldn't. Oh, she was, nope. She shut the door in my face, basically. Thanks, Mrs. A. Appreciated that a lot. That was a really great thing to do to a kid who was mourning. So I went downstairs to go sign in. And John was there, Officer John. And he said, what's going on? I explained. Now, of course, not thinking at the time that they probably would have said something to the other officers, like, hey, by the way, especially because it's, with police and fire and EMS, there's a family to it. And so, when my Nana did have her funeral, there were a lot of officers there and people would come and pay their respects. Even people who, of course, had never laid eyes on my Nana did it out of respect for my dad because it's a community, which is one of the things I loved and was lucky to have growing up as the daughter of a police officer. But I told him what happened. And he's like, So he told him, he said, can you excuse that one? Just, because he realized that was wrong. I found out this year, maybe? I think they chewed her out later. Which, it's one of those things that, okay, standing up for a kid and saying, listen, don't bully this kid. I have a lot of respect for the guy. He nearly died in Afghanistan. Sole survivor of an attack. That's one of the first times I started to understand maybe or experience kind of like, hey, stuff like this happens with war. And how that one event, 9/11, changed the course of so many lives far outside New York City. Far outside the planes themselves or the Pentagon itself or the towers themselves or anything. It changed lives across the country. It was a ripple effect. And I think you'd be hard-pressed, honestly, to find any American, who, particularly ones who were born at or before 2001, who was not somehow profoundly affected. That's the thing. Sorry. Profoundly affected. So now we go to where I am now. It's 2021. I'm married to an EMT. And we're in the middle of COVID-19. Rob and I had been living together for about a year, maybe? No, not even. We'd been living together for about 6 months, maybe. 9 months. It was 9 months, I think, when everything started changing. March of 2020 was one of the hardest months we'd ever lived. Work, of course, got changed. We were working from home and everything was just uncertain. I do tech support for pharmacy, so everything went crazy because now COVID touched so much of our industry and so much of what we do. It still does. And all the testing sites and all of the vaccine sites, and it's just a lot of hard work, and we've really been pushed to do our hardest. And it's been difficult, but we've made it through. But it's been hard. I would have to sit there at my newly formed work area. At one point, I just, arranged pillows on our bed. Finally invested in, like, a camp chair. And, had kind of an ad hoc setup. I got a desk for Christmas. And that was actually awesome. It was a folding desk. And, trying to focus on that work when your heart is riding around in an ambulance is hard. There have been so many times where I would kiss Rob and I would say, I love you, be safe, and mean it, be safe. And wonder if that was the last time I was going to kiss him. I wondered if he was going to come home and we were going to be under a quarantine order. Is he going to end up in the hospital? Is he going to end up in the morgue? Is he going to end up like the thousands of other healthcare workers? And that worried me a lot. So, the reason why I kind of draw the parallel, talking to my mother about this and crying, stressed and worried. And when he got that shot, I cried tears of relief. But up until then, it was just so much worry because it was like, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? Like, you feel like you're walking on eggshells. And she told me something profound. My mother told me about how, she said, yeah, you worry when he's out there. But you have to trust that he knows what he's doing. And that will keep him out of trouble. You have to trust that, he's got his coworkers. He's got his gear. He's got his stuff. You have to have faith in your husband's ability. And that was a profound thing. COVID changed, when we got married, we probably, we would have loved to have probably like a bigger wedding or whatnot, but we had a courthouse wedding, which was awesome. Part of it, of course, it was the I love you and, the sentimental stuff, but it's also the reality of realizing that, hey, God forbid anything had happened to him. If I'm not married, I would have been stuck. I'm lucky. I have really nice in-laws that wouldn't have just, thrown me on the street, but it would have been hard. It would be hard either way, but it's something that you had to think about. Because you had that moment of, he's in a dangerous job. Like the kind of stuff that my husband has to deal with on a daily basis is stuff that not everybody understands. I actually had this conversation at work with somebody. And, I was talking about, he's working really hard. He's stressed. Healthcare workers have been pushed to the limit and past it. They're running ragged. They're running on vapors. Like the last vapors. And I think one of the supervisors, he was like, well, he must make good money though. I'm like, well, yeah, he works a lot. Well, yeah, but surely, he must be paid pretty well. And I finally look at her and I'm like, No. The thing that strikes me, I guess, as I'm thinking about it, we have firefighters, police officers, and EMTs that we called heroes on 9/11. We worship them, we put them on the great pedestal, we're like, these are the best of the best, and they're heroes, and they're awesome. And we did the same thing during the pandemic, at least the early days of it, especially also with the nurses and the doctors were like, these are heroes, they're awesome. What happened with all that hero worship, though? There are still EMTs out there who, if they themselves need an ambulance, would be out thousands of dollars because they have no insurance. There are those out there who make minimum wage and are lucky, but not much more, if anything. We're lucky that my husband works for a good company that pays, I think, more than the usual prevailing, which is nice. But still, I mean, you think about everything that they do and everything that's required to become an EMT or a firefighter or a police officer. There's so much training, there's so much stress, there's so much risk. And yet you have, what do people make from that, though? And at times I feel like you get the whole, like, the tax bill's like, oh, they're so expensive. It costs money to get the good people. And they earn that wage every damn day. Part of it isn't just because of what they may always do every single day, because they might do mundane stuff today, but it's being ready for those moments. Like those firefighters on 9/11, on 9/10, yeah, they probably just had some routine stuff. God knows, somebody could have pulled a cat out of the tree in the Bronx, or a little dumpster fire out in Queens, or what have you. Those little things. And so to the average person, that may look like, geez, that's a lot to pay for somebody who's putting out the little things. But you pay them partly because they have all the gear and all the knowledge for the big stuff that happens. And they got paid that money because then on that day, they were the ones that had to respond to a scenario that nobody could ever have imagined. You have these buildings that are burning down, people who are trapped, and there's jet fuel everywhere, and it's a horrible thing, and the natural urge is to run away. It's just like with a deadly virus. If somebody is coughing and feverish, yeah, I'm not going to get real close to them. But the healthcare workers have to. You have these people who are going to these situations that most reasonable folks would avoid. Let's be honest, it's reasonable. I mean, if there's a building on fire, you're going to get out. That's kind of the idea. Most people aren't going in. Most people aren't going up into a building that has just been hit by a jet. Most people don't do that. It's not safe. It doesn't make sense. But the firefighters do it because of a couple things. Number one, it's their job. But number two, because they recognize that this is a risk that they take. Because it's their job to go out there and save somebody. That's what they do. And it's not just about, the check. It's about, it's a lifestyle. I mean, it takes somebody amazing to want to do this kind of stuff. Because you're signing up for a lot of stuff. And it's not just you, but it's your family. I mean, I've lost count of how many times that my husband has come home very late because he's had a last-minute NICU run or whatever run. Basically, right now, my policy as far as expecting my husband home is I'll see him when I see him. If he texts me to say I'm coming home early or I'm coming home on time, that's great. But I don't expect it. And I don't get upset. I even wove that into our vows action. I basically said, I'm never going to be mad at you for coming home late. Because at that point, I understand it's his job. It is what it is. But there's so much more to it, too. There's so much stress and risk that can be taken. What we know now, of course, with Ground Zero, is that so many people who were there breathed in and were covered in all this dust that turns out to be carcinogenic. Well, of course, I mean, you're going to clean off as best you can, but that could still come home to the family. There's also the fact that there's PTSD and risks that come along with that. I mean, you have somebody who's burnt out to pieces. They're going to come home and they can't switch that off. They're going to try, and they're going to try to compartmentalize it, but whether as the daughter of a cop and as the wife of an EMT, I know two things. Number one, I will never know all of the things that happened that day. There will be stories and there will be things that will be too god-awful for them to say out loud or share. And I accept that. I will not ask. I will not pry. Because there are things that I might not have been able to process. But number two, what I know is that they can't always shut it off. Yeah, they're going to try to put everything into that box, but it's going to be difficult to impossible. And they may come home cranky like anybody else. And, I could be mad at my husband if he comes home cranky or tired. But then I also try to have grace and remember that, well, what did you do? What did you do today, though? I mean, granted, it's not like I sat on my butt and ate bonbons all day. But I never had to make a decision that could potentially have fatal consequences. I never had anybody who swung at me. I have never had to put myself into a situation that could kill me or maim me. Ever. Because that's not my job. I haven't dealt with this unending barrage of calls and things going on. I have never seen stories upon stories upon stories of people like me dying at work. I never, have had that. I mean, were there help desk technicians that probably perished in the World Trade Center? I'm sure. But that was because they happened to be there. I'm talking about people who died because they had to go and do their job. That's hard. It's scary. And it's not just hard and scary when you're living with them and you're the one worrying about it, but also, they have to think about this sometimes and be like, hey, what if this is it? What am I going to tell? Well, what am I going to tell my wife? What are they going to tell my wife? What is she going to think? What's she going to remember? Or my daughter or whatever. As a kid, I would have nightmares about my father dying in the line of duty. Many of them. And there was one police officer in Providence who had died when I was a kid, who had two daughters. He's like 1 year more experience than my father. And that hit home. And that was terrifying because my mother would always say, oh, he knows his stuff. He's been around for a while, da, da, da. And then you have this officer who had been on the job longer than my dad who gets killed. And all of a sudden you're like, you don't have that barrier of it couldn't happen. Because then you're like, it could happen to him too now. And so that kind of opens up that gate. I've been lucky I haven't really had nightmares about Rob yet. But I'm sure I'll start getting them too. And I also worry it's in the daytime. I did have at one point, though, a weird dream where I was in his uniform and we were trying to treat a patient and I'm sitting there going, I'm not licensed for this. I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. Trying to be in those shoes. So on this eve of 9/11, what I'm going to circle back to is this. It's not just the first responders. But you have to remember that it's not just, a police officer, it's a police officer family, or a firefighter family, or an EMS family, or a nurse family, or a doctor family, or whatever family. That these folks who are on the front line aren't just like a shield or an axe or or a stethoscope. They're real people behind those uniforms. They do not consider themselves heroes. And anytime I refer to my husband, like I've said something to him, I'm like, you're a hero. He doesn't hear. No. As far as my husband's concerned, the real heroes are the ones who either died on 9/11 or who are buried at Arlington. He's like, I'm just a guy. I'm just an EMT. I'm like, but that's the way you look at it. They are, in the end, ordinary people who are sometimes asked to do extraordinary things. And it can be very hard on them and very hard on their family and friends. There's crazy schedules. There's not knowing what's going on. God, I've lost count of how many holidays that have been worked by my dad and my husband. Is what it is. I mean, it doesn't bother me now. I'm just like, okay. You get used to it. But sometimes it does kind of suck. You get used to so many times where you want to do something and it's like, nope, they got called in. Oh, that church picnic that, you want to take your atheist husband to go and, nope, not going to happen. He's working. And it wasn't because he went to scheduling and said, help me. But, I did tease him about it, but he felt bad. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry. But there's so much to that. Biggest thing I think that we need to remember as we're honoring those who died on 9/11, especially as we're honoring, the firefighters and the EMTs and the police officers who died in the line of duty that day. Let's remember that every day, thousands of people are getting sick and dying in this generation's crisis. Think of all the families who have had to bury their loved one with nobody around or with just the smallest possible crowd because of pandemic rules. The people who, we haven't been able to hold a memorial for them because there's a virus going around and you can't have people congregate. There is no memorial site for them right now. There's nothing. There are places where they are now being treated as though they are some sort of crisis actor or agent of the government, or, that they're hurting people on purpose to make it look bad, or whatever conspiracy theory du jour you have. Let's not forget the heroes of 9/11. That goes without saying. But let's not forget the heroes that are out there today as well, 20 years later, fighting another crisis and insurmountable odds. And 9/11 was one day. Although you can also count all the days after when they were digging out Ground Zero. This is a year and a half and counting. I know this seems like a weird place to put it, but get your vaccine and wear your damn mask. We're tired. We are flippin' tired and exhausted and strained and stressed. And it's hard. Those are the moments where I think to myself, I don't know how we're going to get through this. How? How am I going to get through this with my sanity somewhat intact? I'm scared. And then I remember my mother, 9/11, and the days after. And we made it. We will make it. We are strong. There's no doubt in my mind. But it's hard. Doing the things that you're asked to do right now is the best way to show support to the people that you may call heroes. When you care about them, that's how you show it. Because if you clap and you're like, oh, you're a hero, and you tell them that, they're going to get uncomfortable. They don't believe it. Don't do it. What I want you to do is think of those who've come before us, who've made sacrifices and done these things, and be part of that. You know, think about all the people who lined up to go and donate blood after 9/11. All the people who, you know, banded together and donated, like the America of 9/12. The America of 9/12/21 needs a little more of the America of 9/12/01. The one where we weren't talking about politics, we weren't talking about that. We were acknowledging the reality of a crisis and banding together to face it head on. That's what we need right now, is to band together and face this crisis head on. That, my friends, is the way to remember and to honor the heroes of 9/11.